The last topic that we're covering today for the 220 1102 exam is Objective 4.9. And 4.9 talks about given a scenario, use remote access technologies. Primarily, what they're going to want you to be able to do is differentiate the operating systems or environments where you might use these different type of technologies, and then what the definitions are for those different types of technologies. So the first thing is, as IT professionals, it's going to be extremely common that we are going to not physically be in front of the user's workstation or their laptop or their device, but we're going to want to have the technology to allow us as if we were, remotely controlling their computer. And the common methods that we'll run into, these are the most common and ones we'll want to know about for this exam, are RDP, VPN, VNC, SSH, RMM, MSRA, and then some third-party tools. So we're going to basically go through each one of these now. RDP stands for the Remote Desktop Protocol. It's most often used in Windows environments, although it is possible to have a remote desktop connection to a Linux machine if you have the package installed on the Linux machine. For this exam, RDP, Windows environment, it has a graphical user interface. Once you RDP into another desktop, it feels like you're on that desktop. So over here on my demo machine, if I open up remote desktop connection here, if I would have kept that up there, remote desktop connection, if I click on that, I've previously connected to my virtual domain controller. This is on my VMware server where I have several virtual machines. One of them is a domain controller. If I click connect and I provide the proper credentials and I have the permissions to do so, this is literally the equivalent of as if I'm sitting directly in front of that machine. This is an example of some PowerShell scripts that I'm running all the time on that machine, just to give you a real life PowerShell script. This is as if I was sitting in front and like next to that machine and a monitor was directly connected to that machine, would look just like this. I'm able to remotely do something like run this PowerShell script on that machine, even though I'm here in the classroom. That's remote desktop. That's super, super common in Windows and used all the time. Remote desktop requires port 3389, or that's its default port. Typically, we don't want to connect directly to remote desktop from the internet. We want to connect first to a device, and that device either through a virtual private network where we're connected to the device, and the device will connect to the remote desktop connection once we're on the virtual private network. We don't want to have port 3389 open to the internet. But that's a RDP, that's remote desktop. VPNs allow us to, even though we're not physically in the area where we're in our corporate network, for example, or our office machine, we're able to use a VPN, which is typically as a client and a server that we install the VPN technology typically, and then we fire it up and we connect, and then we'll get an IP address from our corporate DHCP server for the traffic occurring over that virtual private network. For all intents and purposes, we may as well physically be on the corporate network, even though we may be removed. So this is what a VPN is. We typically have site-to-site VPN, or we have remote access VPNs. It depends on the software that's being used. VNC is very much like RDP, but it's typically used in non-Windows or non-Microsoft environments. And again, it's used to be able to connect to machines and control them remotely. SSH stands for Secure Shell, and SSH allows us to make a connection to a remote machine. and typically we will make that SSH connection, and we'll be doing everything in the command or terminal window, but we can make an SSH connection to a remote machine, and then we can, for example, connect via Linux to an SSH to a remote machine and type pwd, and that would give us the working directory of that remote machine. We'd see everything from that remote machine wherever it is that we connected. RMM allows us to have a remote connection through a remote module. This is typically used by managed service providers in IT. There's a whole lot of things about RMMs depending on what's being used. It can introduce vulnerabilities, so you would only want to give access to that to an authorized IT service provider. And Microsoft has built in something called Windows Remote Assistance. This can be configured. It's actually based on that RPD protocol, and it has different vulnerabilities that are similar to RDP, so you have to be very, very careful with it. But the idea was you could be a client and invite somebody to have a remote connection to your machine to help you troubleshoot it over the internet potentially, or over the network. There are also many other third-party tools. Just in the 220.11.02, you'll just want to know if they're describing a scenario where somebody's taking control of a machine remotely, that they're talking, and they're not one of the listed technologies, that they're using a remote tool. And I was lucky enough to work with an IT services provider that had very powerful remote tools that weren't any of the ones we listed. I'm not going to mention it because you're not going to be asked about in the exam. But it was very powerful. It would log the connection. We were providing service to our clients. We would make a connection through this third-party tool. It would begin a logged clock of that connection, and then we'd have to put notes what we did, and that served as the basis for invoicing because it was he billed by the hour. So that was really cool. So for the 220.11.02, RDP, Windows, VNC, very much like RDP, but not necessarily Windows. SSH, a terminal connection typically seen in Linux or Unix, and in security considerations. For example, with RDP, it uses port 3389. Usually we're going to want to have a VPN connection first, and then RDP into any of the machines we see. Well, believe it or not, that's officially the last module of this exam. And as you can see, if I scroll down, there's nothing left as far as the objectives, but in the objectives document, they give you this acronym list. We have provided you with flashcards on your student portal, and I recommend being able to go through those flashcards and get all of them right. You will get some questions right on the 220.11.02 if you're able to identify the abbreviation with the description. That's going to be really, really, really helpful. Okay, so definitely pay attention to everything that we've covered in the class and use all the additional things we've given you. I'm going to go ahead and end this recording right now, but I'm going to stay online with the broadcast, with the stream, that not in a movie format, because I want to kind of give you some final things about this class. So I'm just going to click new topic and then I'll get back, but what we do after this won't be on the portal.